listening to the ATM Marketplace podcast. In preparation for growing client interest in the quickly expanding market awareness of contactless EMV card payments, Fiserv Card Services has developed the capability and is certified to process dual interface or contactless EMV chip card transactions for both debit and credit. For issuers interested in adopting contactless chip cards, Fiserv recommends shifting new and replacement card orders and expiration reissues to contactless EMV chip cards. If an issuer desires to mass reissue their portfolio to contactless, Fiserv can support that request as well. Learn more at fiserv.com, Fiserv.com.
Hello and welcome to this ATM Marketplace podcast, How to Win Top-of-Wallet Placement with Tap and Pay Cards. I'm Suzanne Clucky, your host for the podcast. Now that EMV transactions have achieved near ubiquity in the U.S., retailers are stepping up their pursuit of customer convenience by enabling contactless card transactions. And as more American consumers begin to embrace the ease and speed of contactless, FIs are stepping up their issuance of dual interface credit and debit cards. Today I'll be speaking with Jamie Topolsky, Director of Payment Card Products at Fiserv, to learn more about contactless card technology, the reasons behind its sudden growth in popularity in the U.S., and how financial institutions can turn this trend to their favor with top-of-wallet preference among their cardholders.
Fiserv provides debit, credit, ATM, network, and digital card management solutions to financial institutions of all sizes. Fiserv moves money and information in a way that moves the world and is a global leader in payment and financial technology. With market-leading fraud solutions, proven digital card enablement capabilities, consultative services, and our vast experience in integrating with core and digital systems, we help financial institutions on all industry core account processors achieve best-in-class results. Learn more at Fiserv.com, Fiserv.com.
First of all, Jamie, I want to thank you for joining me today to talk about contactless cards and the process and reason for using them. But for starters, for our listeners who have not used a contactless card, can you describe the contactless payment process?
Sure, Suzanne, and it's great to be talking to you today about contactless. For those who haven't yet had the opportunity to use a contactless card, the first time is really remarkable because we're all used to inserting the chip. When the POS terminal prompts us to insert, or when the person behind the register says, "Go ahead and insert your card," and then you have to wait, right? And it could be 4 seconds, 5 seconds, 9 seconds, and usually at some point you get a pretty annoying tone from the POS terminal reminding you to take your card out, and you really have to stay there and look at your card the whole time just to make sure you're ready to take it out when it tells you to. Now, when you use a contactless card, instead of inserting the chip, you just hold the card within an inch or two of the terminal, basically tapping it on top of the terminal for maybe a second. A light or like a pleasant chime will let you know that it's read the data, and then you can put it away, and that's it. So it is really so quick that the first few times you think that something may have gone wrong, it didn't work, or it can't be that quick, but it really is. A second of tapping, and then you can put the card away, and the terminal does the rest of its stuff. So it's really remarkably faster than when you have to insert the chip in the terminal.
Yeah, that was my first experience with contactless cards. I didn't even know the transaction was complete, and they're handing me back my card because it's just sitting on top of the terminal. So what makes contactless transactions so much faster than chip?
So the big difference, and it's almost a bit misleading to consumers because they don't realize a lot is still happening behind the scenes. But when you insert the chip, in most cases, what's really happening is a full authorization request out to the issuer of the card or their processor, and then an authorization response. So it's not just the fact that the terminal has to read, and communicate back and forth with the chip that's in the card. It has to wait for that entire authorization message for most transactions around the world, for most contact chip transactions. And that's really the lion's share of the time that someone's waiting for. And it's only when that final authorization response comes back and the chip on the card does some last minute calculations and decisioning about the transaction that you're then given the prompt to remove the card. With the contactless transaction, when you tap it, very, very quickly, the card and the terminal are communicating with one another and are deciding, really sharing all the information that's necessary to send the transaction online. So everything happens very, very quickly between the card and the terminal, and then the online authorization can still take place, once you put the card away. So you could be busy as a consumer. You could be putting your groceries in your cart, gathering your items, whatever, putting your wallet back in your purse, and that's when the online authorization message is taking place. But your work is done, and that's why it seems so much faster.
Okay, got it. So why did the U.S. market start with contact EMV before offering contactless then, if contactless is so much faster and more efficient?
Yeah, it's definitely frustrating because you think, well, why didn't we just go to this right away? And the reality is that the U.S. has followed the path of almost every other country that went down this road of EMV, and that we started with contact EMV first, and then added contactless at a later date, which is what happened in Canada and Europe and Australia. And ideally, we would have been able to, start right with contactless. But the challenge is that we really were under a lot of pressure to get EMV rolled out quickly when there were a lot of data breaches and a lot of counterfeit card fraud taking place several years ago. We had to get EMV rolled out fairly quickly for a market of our size and complexity. And adding contactless, which does add some complexity to the entire chip transaction, I think would have been too hard to get it done in that time frame. So everyone collectively agreed, okay, let's start with contact EMV, and then we could see about adding contactless at a later date. So ideally, we would have started with contactless from day one, but it's more work, and we were under the gun to get contact EMV done quickly to reduce the amount of counterfeit fraud.
Okay, well that makes sense. One major thing at a time then. So how are contactless cards, EMV cards specifically, different from just regular EMV cards?
Yeah, there's a few differences, and you'll sometimes hear contactless cards called dual interface cards. You'll see those terms used interchangeably because the contactless EMV cards still have that chip that's visible on the front of the card. So you have that chip that you could insert for merchants that don't accept contactless. And then in addition, there's an antenna built into obviously a very thin antenna built into the plastic card itself. Not the kind of antenna like you have to pull up like on an old-fashioned radio or something, but it's built in, sandwiched in, very, very thin. And it's connected or coupled with the chip. It's a special chip inside the card as well. And so that is what allows it to communicate wirelessly without inserting the chip into the terminal. So you have the ability to insert the chip, plus you have the ability to tap. And in addition, although we call it dual interface, there's more interfaces because there's still the magnetic stripe on the back. So we all know there's still merchants out there that haven't implemented support for chip yet. So you always have that magnetic stripe to fall back on if you need to. And of course, your account number and information is printed on the front or the back of the card as well. So that's needed as well, right? When you're filling out, a payment, let's say, for paying, at a doctor's office, when you get the bill in the mail later on, they ask you to write in your card number. So you have the contact chip, you have the contactless chip, you have the mag stripe, and you have your printed account information all on that same piece of plastic. So it's really 4 interfaces, not dual interface.
What is different from earlier contact payments adoption attempts from then to now?
Sure, we tried contactless many years ago. Some of our listeners may remember things like the Chase Blink card or the Discover Zip card. This was an earlier attempt at implementing contactless payments in the U.S. market. And back then there were a couple of challenges to the success of contactless. The first was that there really weren't many merchant locations that would support these contactless cards at that time. There was just a handful, and not very widely accepted as opposed to now. And then also, at that time we were all just swiping our cards, the magnetic stripe, and that was a very fast experience, right? It didn't take very long, whether you're at the pump or at any merchant, just to swipe the card and put it away. So the relative benefits of the contactless transaction weren't significant to the average card holder. Now that we've all been living with the realities and the amount of time it takes for a contact chip transaction, and we're, for the most part, we're okay with it because we know the security that comes along with it. The benefits of contactless now will be much more relevant and noticeable to the card holder. So they're going to get all of the benefits and security of the EMV contact chip with the speed and convenience of that old-fashioned fast swipe or tap transaction. So it's going to be, I think the big difference is it's going to be much faster compared to what people are used to, and a much broader acceptance. In particular, now transit agencies across the U.S. are migrating from their old proprietary closed-loop payment platforms to instead now leveraging the standard contactless cards. So instead of having to get a special fare card, whether you're in Chicago or New York or Boston or Miami, you could use your standard debit or credit card that has the contactless capabilities and use that to ride the subway or a bus or whatever's applicable in that market. So that's a big reason why I think it's going to be different as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that this summer, I believe it was, the New York Metro went at least part of the Metro, they went to a contactless payment system. And I'm wondering, have you heard anything about how that's gone over with consumers?
Yeah, they've only done it in a relatively limited number of stations so far. And everything I've heard is that it's very fast, it's operating well. They're fortunate in that New York is not the first market to do this in the U.S., so they're learning from other areas. Like Chicago did it several years ago, and the Chicago Ventra card now can be supported, and what's called the Ventra Payments platform can support contactless cards from any of the four standard payment brands: Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and American Express. And in Miami, the Metro Rail there just launched contactless as well. So it's happening, it's city by city around the country, and every place that they roll it out seems to be extremely successful and very well received.
That's great. So that kind of takes us to the next question I had, which is, mass transit seems to have been everywhere that it's been implemented, has been the turning point for getting contactless payments to really take hold. Is that kind of what you foresee happening with the U.S. market as well?
Well, and certainly in certain parts of the country where mass transit's very important, it will be an important factor to drive adoption and usage. But really, any merchant that is frequently visited and where speed of transaction is important is going to have an impact on this. So quick serve restaurants are another category where you see broad implementation and broad usage, and this will be applicable not just in the metropolitan areas where we have transit, high use of transit, but across the country. So when you go to Subway, I mean, pretty much as far as I know, every Subway I've been to in the U.S. now supports contactless transactions at the terminal. Most of the McDonald's and Burger Kings and fast food restaurants do. Starbucks does. Dunkin' Donuts does. So all the quick service restaurants are another huge factor that will impact adoption. I think drugstores, the big drugstore chains, so Walgreens and CVS, support contactless very broadly. And that, again, any place you go into frequently, and even supermarkets are now starting to roll it out because they are, again, getting people through the lanes quickly is very important. And then lastly, some of the big box retailers, Target and Costco, both have rolled out support for contactless transactions as well. So you're seeing broad acceptance, and the broader the acceptance, the quicker the adoption uptake will be for cardholders.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense. Yeah, Costco was my first experience with it, and I was really impressed with the speed of the transaction. What is the differential between contactless speed and a typical contact EMV?
Well, the reality is that the entire transaction from start to finish may take just as long because of that authorization message. But
Hmm.
the cardholder's involvement is going to be less than a second. So the tap to the from the time they tap that card until they get that beep, it's okay to remove the card and put it away. It's going to be less than a second. Whereas before, waiting for that authorization response with the card in the terminal could take 4, 5, or 6 seconds, depending on the communication speed. So it really can be a savings of easily 5 seconds or more per transaction. That the cardholder is now free to start putting the card away and do other stuff and not think about it anymore.
So it's really a matter of perception as much as anything, then.
Well, it's the perception of the cardholder, and it's also the reality for the cardholder. Their job in the transaction is done. They don't care that there's communication going on behind the scenes between the merchant and the issuer of the card or the issuer processor.
Hmm.
They're able to go on to other stuff and not have to think about, oh, I need to keep my eyes on my card and wait for that sound before I can take it out.
Sure, not to forget the card and all of the rest that goes with that. And I'm guessing too that the communication can actually begin during the transaction.
The communication between the merchant and the issuer of the card.
Yeah, as they're checking out whatever you're purchasing. If I'm at Costco buying groceries, that card, as soon as that card is laid down, the transaction communication begins. Correct?
Well, the POS terminal at that time can gather the information that's necessary from the card. It cannot send the authorization request to the issuer until it does know the amount in most circumstances, unless it's doing specialized transaction with a pre-authorization. But usually, so yeah, there's the communication between the POS terminal and the card and gathering the card data, and that certainly can take place before the final amount is known.
Hmm.
But then the actual authorization request, in most cases, would wait until the full amount is known, so that the issuer of the card can ensure there's sufficient funds.
Sure, exactly. And that brings me to another question about the use of PIN numbers. If I have a contactless debit card, do I need to use my PIN? Is that determined by the merchant? How does that work?
Yeah, it's the same sort of rules that apply for any other transaction could apply for a contactless transaction as well. At least I'm talking in the U.S. market. There are different rules in other countries about when you can use contactless. But the reality is, when you tap your card, depending on the amount of the transaction and the specific network rules that are applicable, you could certainly be prompted still at the end to enter a PIN or to sign for a transaction, depending on the specific merchant, the industry, and the amount of the transaction. But in many cases, for transactions below a certain threshold, you will not be prompted for any cardholder verification at all. You can just tap and go. It really depends, like I said, on industry, the payment brand or network that the transaction is routing on, and the amount of the transaction.
Yeah, I know that in some countries, for instance, the UK, they have a limit on the amount of a transaction, but that's not the case in the US, correct?
That's correct. That's primarily because most of their transactions there, most of their cards are chip and PIN, and
Hmm.
so they above a certain dollar or I guess a pound threshold in the UK, they require the insertion of the chip because the PIN is actually validated right there locally by the card. Whereas in
Hmm.
the US market, when we enter a PIN, in almost all circumstances, that PIN is validated by sending it online to the issuer of the card. So that's the big distinction there.
Got it. Okay. So ultimately, are contactless cards as safe and secure as contact EMV cards?
Yes, they definitely are. There's because it's still using the exact same standard for the transaction itself. So it's the same type of cryptogram or security that goes into the transaction. The only main difference is the way that the information is communicated back and forth between the card and the terminal. So you hear sometimes stories or read stories in the news about these cards not being as safe, or that criminals could somehow steal your information for them. And those are largely untrue. The reality is that the card has to be within 1 or 2 inches of the POS terminal for it to be read. So a criminal couldn't be standing on the other side of the room or the other side of a bus and get your information from your card or steal it remotely. The person has to be within 1 or 2 inches and have something that can read your card.
Mm-hmm.
And what's more is the information that can be read from a card is not sufficient for criminals to use. So you can, for example, your name cannot be read off of a card through a contactless reader. The security code changes with the transaction or is different and can't be used in the magnetic stripe. So there's a lot of security features that go into the contactless interface of the card to make it so that either it's extremely difficult to get the information, or even if you do get the information, you can't use it to make a fake card. You can't make a fake chip card, and you can't make a fake mag stripe card with it.
Right. So I don't really need to worry about carrying a lead-lined wallet around with me.
No, there's lots of ads for those, and certainly companies are making good money off of scaring people. But no, there really isn't any need for that whatsoever.
Why choose a contactless card over a mobile contactless payment?
Well, I think that it's not choosing one over the other. I think what's starting to happen is that they both have their strengths and their place for usage. So we thought maybe a few years ago that mobile wallets would be the way of doing contactless payments at the physical point of sale. And adoption and usage of that hasn't proven out the way many of us in the industry thought it would. For whatever reason, and there are a few reasons probably, but consumers just haven't adopted it as widely as we thought. However, mobile wallets have been great for things like in-app payments and online purchases because it's such a convenient and easy way to get your payment information into the app, whether it be an app store or an in-app purchase, or making purchases online because it's the mobile wallet is integrated with the browser on the mobile device. So it works very, very well for that. I think that contactless cards are preferred much more strongly for use in the point of sale, in the physical point of sale, largely because you know as a consumer that no matter what form of payment the merchant takes, the card will work. So if they take contactless payments, wonderful. You tap and you're happy and you go. If they don't, you insert the chip and it goes just fine. Or, even in some cases you swipe. Whereas with so once you have that piece of plastic in your hand, you know it's going to work no matter what. If you take out a mobile device at a merchant and the contactless doesn't work for some reason, then you have to go back into your wallet or purse and get your card out and start all over. So I think the ubiquity of the card working at every merchant is what makes contactless cards so great for point of sale purchases, and the integration of mobile wallets into the app store and app payments and the browser on the mobile device is what makes that so great for those types of payments.
Yeah, and there's one less step to it too. It seems. I mean, with your mobile phone, you're always going to have to authorize somehow. You're going to bring up the screen, and do your thumbprint or whatever it is that's required to get that transaction started. With a contactless card, all you have to do is just pull it out of your wallet and tap it. So it seems like that's a little simpler process.
It is. It's a bit simpler. It could be for many people a bit quicker, and I'm sure there will be people who will, once they get used to it, will be very happy to use their mobile wallet at merchants as well. Certainly, we see adoption of merchant-specific mobile payments, such as the Starbucks app, that have had huge success. So I'm not saying it won't ever happen, but for now, it seems like the card form factor still is preferred for the physical point of sale.
Sure. Okay. So tell me now how contactless cards fit into the payments industry today.
Well, it's as you know, it's a complex industry, and financial institutions, very broadly speaking, have so much to deal with at once, and there's so many different initiatives and goals competing for their attention So it is tough to say how contactless cards should fit into this. I guess my quick answer would be that it's largely about convenience for the cardholder and capturing market share. And by market share, I mean really share of spend. It seems from most of the data I've seen from other countries that contactless cards are very successful at capturing a share of spend from, particularly picking it up from cash. So what happens is there's lots of small dollar transactions that people will still take a couple bucks or $5 or $10 out of their wallet to pay for. Once they get comfortable with contactless payments and the acceptance grows, a lot of those low dollar transactions migrate to the contactless card. So it's really a way of increasing share of spend for your card holders and making the experience that much more convenient. And the convenience will lead to top of wallet positioning, for a contactless card over a card that doesn't have the antenna in it. And then obviously capturing the share from cash just leads to incremental revenue in terms of interchange and other usage revenue that you get from the card. So on both fronts, it's really a win-win for the issuer.
Okay. And what is the impetus? What is the reason why an issuer would want to jump in now?
Well, it's a good time right now because we're at a point in the issuance cycle where many banks and credit unions are coming on kind of the second round of their chip card issuance. So they may have started 3 or 4 or even 5 years ago issuing chip cards, and those cards are coming up upon their natural reissuance dates. So rather than sending another contact-only chip, you can increase the utility to the cardholders, increase the usage by going to a contactless card. Also, even if the cards aren't expiring, some of these chips are also starting to expire. So every chip that gets used for one of these payment cards, they have a limited shelf life. They get approved by Visa or MasterCard or Discover, American Express for a certain number of years, and then those chips have to be replaced with a newer chip that might have some newer security features or some additional processing power. And so again, we're seeing issuers have to select new chips, and once you're going to go through that time and expense of going to a new chip, it makes sense to at least consider going to a contactless chip.
Sure, that does make sense. So if I'm a financial institution and I'm interested in getting started with contactless cards, specifically with Fiserv, since we're talking about Fiserv, what's the process, the blueprint for getting started?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. You should, first of all, just get a little bit of a high-level education, and we do offer for all of our clients periodic webinars. There's about one a month right now, so hopefully you can get an invitation via email, and if you don't, certainly reach out to any of your client executives at Fiserv and request one, because we have monthly webinars, and we do also have recordings of those that you can get access to as well if that suits your time and schedule better. So you get a little bit of a high-level education about the process. Figure out your timing as well as when you think might be a good time for you to do this. And that could be driven by things like what's your remaining inventory of plastics with contact-only chips? Or do you have an upcoming branding change that, or something like that might necessitate issuing new cards? So figure out what's the right timing for you. Obviously you need to develop a budget for this because moving from contact-only EMV to contactless does require some additional investment, and the cards are a bit more expensive as well. And then finally, I would say think about a plan for communication and education, both to your cardholders and to your employees, and have that set up ahead of time as well, so that you can answer questions, promote the contactless interface that's now on the card, and have your employees ready to answer questions about how to use the cards or where they can use it or why it's still safe to use these cards from cardholders who might be calling in or walking into the bank branches.
Okay, great. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for your time. It's been a really informative podcast. I know that I have personally learned a lot from it. If somebody who's listening wants more information or wants to talk to you about getting this started with Fiserv, who should they contact?
Well, they can certainly contact me or any of the client executives at Fiserv.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a general email address, clientservices@fiserv.com, that they can reach out to as well.
Okay, great. Well, I really appreciate your time again, and we'll see how this goes with financial institutions. I expect we'll be seeing a lot more contactless payments coming up.
I sure hope so. And thanks a lot, Suzanne, for the great discussion today.
All right.